Now, I'll start off talking about the next test. For the test itself, you need a Scantron. For the pass, you don't. Now, the test, I'll be spending the rest of the class going over what's on the test, you know, the lectures. But now for the pass, I want to, all right, the pass is supposed to be cause and effect. Now, I'll give you an example. There's going to be about 12 cause-effect questions. Here's an example of one of them. Cause. The person sometimes keeps spending more money than they take in. They go bankrupt. Governments will sometimes, especially in modern times, keep spending more money than they take in. The result. And you pick the result from 3 or 4 answers. Now, obviously, if people can keep spending more money than they take in, people are going bankrupt too. Well, the question is, do governments ever go bankrupt? Just ask King Philip of Spain. King Philip of Spain in 1590 went bankrupt, and his son who followed to the throne went bankrupt also. So even kings can go bankrupt, even governments. Kings go bankrupt when they are so deep in debt that they can't collect enough tax money to bail them out. And a lot of kings have found themselves deep in debt. And of course, the English kings were not allowed to raise taxes without consent of the Parliament. And Parliament often would say to the king, no, we're not going to raise taxes, so where you can go attend more parties or fight some more of your wars. We're just not going to support it. So a lot of British kings got deep in debt. And kings can get in debt, governments can get in debt. So that's one. And that's very important because in the nation, well, in Europe, there are 5 countries. They're sometimes called the PIGS, P-I-I-G-S. Portugal, Italy, Greece, Ireland, P-I-I, Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. Those 5 European countries are pretty deep in debt, and especially Greece, so deep that it just simply can't figure out a good way to get out. Then another question I'll be asking you is about climate change. Now, you know, on MSN, I just read yesterday that the only animal that's going to benefit from climate change, from global warming, is the mosquito, and we're going to have more mosquitoes. I'd like to ask them, how can one animal benefit so much from global warming without every other animal or plant benefiting? I mean, I don't doubt that the mosquitoes that benefit from global warming, but personally, I think that every plant and animal on the face of the globe will benefit from global warming. We had global warming once. We once had a uniform worldwide tropical climate. It was called the Cretaceous period. And Antarctica once had tropical plants and animals. Yes?
What about animals that need cold weather to survive, like penguins and polar bears?
There is a variety of penguins that grow in South America that doesn't need cold weather. In other words, some of these animals have the ability to adapt when the cold weather actually finally hit. And in other words, human beings are more alike than any other species of plant or animal that overspreads the globe. Other animals are capable of genetic adaptations. The polar bear. Polar bears are now known to have the same ancestors as grizzly bears. The grizzly bear does not need a cold climate. So if some of these animals disappear as a result of warmth, they will possibly come back later when things cool down again. If you go visit Georgia Aquarium, there's a certain variety of fish that we knew became extinct 100 years ago, but it's made it come back somehow. Well, how? Because the fish are bred in such a way as to reproduce that kind of fish from the fish it came from in the first place. Plants and animals have a big variety, much more so than humans. I mean, I believe that the domestic house cat came from the same stock as the lion and tiger, bobcat, jaguar. In other words, they're capable of adapting. I hope that answers your question. Anyway, global warming. Now, there are fewer sunspots, folks, and some people believe that the last time we had this fewer sunspots was in the late 1600s, and it led to what's called the Little Ice Age. During the Little Ice Age, millions of people in the northern hemisphere died from malnutrition. The same crops that used to grow would not grow anymore, and people starved to death from hunger, malnutrition. Will it happen again? Well, it might. No, what I'm getting at is a lot of people are going to be really made dunces of if the earth suddenly cools down more than it has. If it does, and I don't know what's going to happen, but it would not surprise me from what I know about the sun, if the sun would not all of a sudden bring about a cooling that would offset any of man's global warming. Personally, I think the global warming scare is to try to get the industrialized nations weaker, to make mankind supposedly more even and more equal. Yes?
I read an article about the sunspot thing. They said it wouldn't happen for another 100 years.
What's that?
They said that sunspot thing wouldn't happen for like another 100 or 2 years.
Some people are saying that it's already started. That it's already on its way now. Now, whether even if it happens another 100 years, it still could cool things down and bring on another ice age, like the ones that we've had several times throughout history. The Black Death was caused by cooling. And it's possible that the Roman Empire fell as a result of cooling. All right, let's see. Another question you might see on the past essentially is, oh yes, the people of Rome were idle. Now, I've had said, what does the word idle mean? Well, it means they had no work to do. So as a result, well, the government fed them. Instead of putting them to work, the government fed them. And what happened? The government became poorer and poorer. Trade fell off. The whole economy went down. Yes. Idle, I-D-L-E. Yeah, idle. It means that they didn't have anything to do. They didn't have any work. I mean, I'm surprised. I put that word on the last 2 semesters, and I'm surprised at how many college students don't even know the meaning of the word. Idle. In other words, they had nothing to do. All right. Any other questions now? Okay, I need to move on. One thing from chapter 4 I did not mention, but it is on the test. Euclid is known as the father of geometry. His geometry is called plane geometry, or two-dimensional geometry, and mostly it deals with triangles. Now, if you've taken a course in geometry, you've probably run into the sine, cosine, and tangent of triangles. Some of you are looking at it, you know what I'm talking about. Which brings me up to Pythagoras. Pythagoras was in the numbers racket to the point where his belief in numbers was really religious as much as it was secular. And he attached religious value to numbers. He's famous, though, for the Pythagorean theorem. The Pythagorean theorem. All right, how many of you have seen this, honestly, in your... Okay, most of you. The other class, only half the hands went up. A squared. Now, again, if you have a right triangle, and A is 3, and B is 4, what will C be in length? Okay, yeah, some of you know. 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16, 9 plus 16 equals 25. The square root of 25 is 5. Okay, 3, 4, 5. Again, you might not have expected to see this in a history class, but history covers a broad variety of topics. Plato is like a certain kind of right angle. If this is 90, and this is 60, and this is 30, if the length of this is 1, anybody know what would the length of the hypotenuse be in this kind of angle, triangle? In a 30, 60, 90 degree triangle, the hypotenuse is always 2 times the length of the base. So if this is 1, this will be 2. Plato called it the most beautiful geometric figure. And now, if you get into construction, folk, you will run into triangles a lot. If you could raise these ceiling tile, look up, you'd see a lot of triangulation. Triangle is the most strongest geometric shape that engineers know about. Very important, and it's important that somebody at least be able to figure out the mathematics behind it. All right, Euclid. Now, okay. Rome. Rome, located right here in Italy, if you recall from the map that I had you do in the second pass. It's like other ancient cities located along the Tiber River. The Tiber, T-I-B-E-R, very important. I will write that down. Tiber. It has two names. It's known, number one is the Eternal City, and number two is the City on Seven Hills, because it is, as you might get, located on seven hills. The location on top of seven hills made it easy to defend. Now, in some ways, it was the ideal city to start an empire. Its location was 50 miles from the Mediterranean, so, but yet you had access to the Mediterranean through the Tiber River, which boats could go. But being 50 miles inland, that many would not be overrun by tidal waves, like possibly the island of Crete was. So tidal waves would not hit it. Also, these islands out here were protected somewhat from tidal waves. And also pirates. Pirates are the type of people who are cowards when they meet someone who's as big as they are. The pirates were afraid to go 50 miles up the river, afraid that somebody would come in and shut off their retreat. And if the pirates see no way to run, they're probably not going to invade. So the river, and also the seven hills. It meant that if some enemy took one hill, Rome still had 6 other hills they could get on. And in those days, and this is somewhat still true, the persons on the top of the hill looking down had the advantage of fighting the enemy. I mean, let's face it, arrows shoot better shooting down than they do shooting up. Also, the person on top can see the enemy better and can aim better than the person who's trying to aim upward. So the seven hills made the city easy to defend. It's also centrally located, not in the center of the peninsula, but centrally, and it's near the coastline, but it's halfway up and down in Italy's peninsula. And this made it an ideal location to be able to take over, eventually take over all of Italy. To this day, Rome is the capital of Italy. Now, right at this part of the Tiber River, there was a shallow ford, from which we get our word ford, that name of the car we made. There was a shallow ford that made the river easy to get across. Also easy to build a bridge across. So there's a shallow part of the river right here. But then the rest of the river, the way to the ocean, was deep enough for the big ships to go through. So even though it was not on a sea coast, it had access to the ocean. Now, the Romans had a different attitude than the Greeks in one way. They were never as philosophical as the Greeks. They didn't spend their time on Mars Hill debating this philosophical idea or that. They were more practical than the Greeks were. They did not produce as many philosophers, even though one philosopher that I'm going to introduce you to that I'll talk about later is Cicero. But for the most part, they were more practical than the Greeks and less philosophical. Now, we do not know much about Rome's original inhabitants. Their first inhabitants were called Latins, and the language remained Latin. The Latins inhabited all of Italy and spoke the language that we call Latin. You may know Latin today is a dead language. It's still spoken, it is still spoken in church services, in Catholic church services in particular. And when I was younger, doctors used to write out their prescription to pharmacists in Latin. I don't think they do that anymore because they figure more Americans are educated, but there were some things that they just didn't feel like should be written in plain English. So doctors would communicate with each other and with the pharmaceuticals in Latin to make it more difficult for ordinary persons to understand. It is the deliberate attempt to use code. Now, we don't know much about them. And later, after the Latins came in, another group of people moved in called the Etruscans. Regrettably, we don't know a lot about them either. But when the Greeks began to fan out and colonize, a bunch of Greeks began to settle here. And so the Greeks strongly would influence Rome all the way through its history. The Romans and Greeks worshiped the same gods, and even the Romans believed that their gods lived on Mount Olympus over here. So Greek influence was to be strong, as was Etruscan. Now, according to tradition, all right, Rome was founded, and again, this cannot be historically proven, but Rome was founded in 753 BC. Don't worry about the date, but nevertheless, the Romans dated their history from the 300th year since the founding of Rome, the 400th year since the founding of Rome, 753 BCE, well, I guess I would say to be politically correct. And it was founded by two twin boys, Romulus and Remus. Now, folk nearby here, about 50 miles to the northwest, is a city in Georgia called Rome. Have any of you ever been there, by any chance? This is the one person, this is a response to get from all my class. Anyway, in the center square of Rome, Georgia, is a bronze statue of a she-wolf nursing two baby boys. This is based on the story of Romulus and Remus. According to the story, their parents did not want them, so the parents exposed them to the wild, and a she-wolf took up and adopted the two boys. And they grew up being reared up by wolves. Now, folks, this is not as special as it may sound, because there have been some 50 known cases of wolves rearing up human babies. And these human babies, when they're found, sometimes they're found as young as 3 and 4, and sometimes as old as 6 or 7. When they're brought into contact with humans, they quickly pick up on human speech, and they don't seem to be any worse off having spent the first years of their life with the wolves. But this is documented. It sometimes has happened. In American folklore, there's a story of Pecosville, a baby being dropped accidentally from the wagon when his parents were moving west, and wolves found him and picked him up. I don't know if any of you heard of Pecosville or not, but he's a big part of American folklore. Became a cowboy later. Anyway, according to the story, these twin boys grew up, and eventually Romulus killed Remus in an argument. And the city of Rome then was named after Romulus. Now, again, folks, we're in the middle of a Jewish community here, so I'm going to bring up something that I've never mentioned in class before, but I'll mention it now. There is another story that when King Solomon fell from favor with God, that God said, in fact, I'm going to punish Solomon, so I'm going to raise up a city of Rome that's going to eventually conquer Judea. So in 753, God raised up the city of Rome, and Rome was destined from the beginning to punish the Jews for their sins. And Rome was instrumental in scattering the Jews all over the face of the earth. Again, it was about 800 years after the founding of Rome. But again, that's the story that Jewish rabbis will tell their congregations. I've had a Jewish girl in my class this morning who, yes, she had heard the story. So, you know, it is a story that goes around. I'm not going to say I believe it. Now, according to the ancient tradition, Rome was ruled by 7 kings. All right, for hundreds of years, nobody doubted these stories, that Rome had 7 kings. They named them, each one ruled for about 20 or 30 years apiece. And then along came the historian Gibbon in the late 1700s. Gibbon devoted himself to highly criticizing ancient stories. I think Gibbon's real motive was to undermine the Bible. But nevertheless, he said these first 7 kings did not exist. His argument was that we don't have any original sources for them, that all we have is secondary sources about their existence. Well, your book will say we now know, thanks to other documents, that the last 3 of them at least did exist. So Rome at least had 3 kings. The 7th king was overthrown, and Rome set up a form of government called a republic. Republican form of government. Now, the republic was destined to last, about 300 or 400 years. Those are round figures. It did not last. So when I talk about the fall of Rome, Rome actually experienced 2 falls. There was the fall of the Republic, and I'm going to tell you right now, the Roman Republic did not last. And there was the fall of the empire itself. A lot of the stories that were told about this period of Rome and this period of time are not believed today. There's a story about the rape of a bunch of Sabine women. There was a story about Cincinnatus, whose courage defended the city of Rome against invaders, and the city of Cincinnati today is named after him. Again, Cincinnatus' morality seems to have been really, really high. So you know, I don't think that's a reason not to believe. There was a story of Horatius on the bridge. When an enemy was invading, they needed someone. They needed to destroy the bridge to keep the enemy out. They needed someone who would guard the workers who were destroying the bridge. Horatius volunteered, and he stood all by himself while behind him the rest of the army was frantically destroying a very well-built bridge. Finally, the bridge was destroyed, but Horatius was trapped on the other side, and he was killed. He became a hero to Romans. Again, some of these stories are almost unbelievable because, again, Horatius' bravery was really high. Now, around 400 BCE, Rome was invaded by a group of people called the Celts. We do not know much about who the Celts were and where they came from, but they are mentioned from time to time in history. The Celts came in and sacked Rome, but Rome quickly recovered. Rome was very versatile. It was to be 800 years, from 400 BCE to 410 CE, when Rome was sacked again, this time by a group of people called the Vandals. But for 800 years, the city of Rome was not successfully invaded. All right. Rome was surrounded by enemies on all sides, but they were tough and resilient. The story goes that Rome was one day engaged in a war with a city-state, and they won. And once they'd beaten the city, they went to the city and said, hey, listen, be our ally, be our friend. We will build a road to your city. We'll trade with your city. We will let your sons marry our daughters, and we hope you'll let your your daughters marry our sons. You can intermarry with us. We'll build a road, and we promise if you're ever invaded by your enemies, we will come quickly and protect you, because we'll have a good road from our city to yours. So they got an ally. A few years later, they conquered another city and made it their ally. Then they conquered another city and made it their ally. And every time they made an ally of a city, they built a road. And it became a saying, all roads lead to Rome, which is largely true. Rome has roads that they built so well that even in today's world of automobiles, some of them are still in service today. They, of course, have done some repair work, but roads were essential because, number one, it meant that if you got on the right road, you didn't have to worry about stopping and finding directions. And also, you could carry carts and carry a lot heavier loads on a smooth road than you could on a dirt road or over hills and valleys. So they built roads that enabled quick and easy transportation from one city to another. Rome began to tell its conquered cities, you furnish us troops for our army, and in turn, we'll defend you. You defend us when we're attacked, we'll defend you. Eventually, the Italian cities got to where they liked having Rome because, number one, Rome kept peace among them. And number two, the cities realized as Rome grew, they grew too. There was mutual favors. Also, Rome gave loyal conquered people special privilege. Now, there were three groups of people whom Rome never was able to placate: the Jews, the British, and the people living in Carthage down here. Three people, but otherwise, for the most part, Rome was able to eventually placate the Greeks, the people living in Asia Minor, and the people living in Syria, and even people living here in Mesopotamia and Spain. They were able to build up an empire, and most of its people were peaceful with them. Most of the people even liked being ruled by Rome. The Britishers and Jews did not. Basically, they used diplomacy, persistence. They learned where to place forts, strategically place forts, and some of these forts, by the way, still stand. They eventually were able to conquer all of Italy. All right, which brings us up to government under the Republic. Rome had one big problem, folk. they never defined what an office meant or how much power it had. Now, if you read the United States Constitution, it says, Congress shall have power to coin money and regulate the value thereof, and, to make laws. Congress shall have power. The president shall have power to call special session of Congress. We define. And if you join the Army, all the ranks are defined. The rank of major is the rank below lieutenant colonel or above captain. What if you had an army where that over here in this city, the rank of major meant you had 500 men, but over here in this city, the rank of major meant you had 15,000 men, and a captain over here might have more power than a lieutenant, maybe not know if he would have, but more power than a general over here. But our army, we define exactly, what a what the rank of a captain means and how many men a captain is expected to have, and so on and so forth. But in those days, the Romans never did. And some people believe this was to be the ultimate reason, one of the many reasons for the downfall. They never defined what an office really held. And an office that meant one thing to one generation would later become practically meaningless to another generation. Become nothing more than ceremonial, whereas it should be like having an army where the generals no longer actually lead the troops, but they perform ceremonies and they're figureheads. Well, eventually a lot of these offices became nothing more than mere figureheads. Now, but the one office I'm going to name was the office of consul. Now, because Rome did not want to have anything to do with kings anymore, they made sure there were 2 consuls. There were 2 of them. Each of the consuls had equal power, and each of them could stop the other one if one of them didn't like what the other was doing. The idea was, we don't want to have a king anymore. Now, we're going to wind up seeing that they did have. The consuls would lead in time of war. They would govern peace. They were responsible for the administration of justice. Then, in addition to consuls, there was a senate. The Senate consists of 300 men who were appointed for life. Now, at first they didn't, but then eventually the senators were passed on down from father to son. Now, in our country we have a Senate, and sometimes a father might serve as senator, but rarely will a father serve as senator and his son come in and follow him. It does happen, but it's pretty rare. But it's not automatic. In other words, every senator in our Senate has to go back home to his constituency every 6 years to get reelected. And when a senator decides to retire, oftentimes someone else will take his place who has to be elected also. But in those days, they got to where the Senate was a hereditary office. In other words, my father was a senator, I'm his oldest son, so when he dies, I become a senator automatically. This was not the original intent. Karl Marx said that all history was a story of class struggle. It's like he was taking part of the truth and making the whole truth. But there was a class struggle that occurred between the patricians and the plebeians. Patricians, they were the rich. The plebeians, they were the poor. The patricians had all the privileges. Well, eventually, though, Rome realized it needed its plebeians to help them fight wars because there weren't enough patricians to go out and fight, and they needed the numbers to the ranks of the plebeians would give them. So, to get the plebeians on their side, they gave them privileges. They finally, at one time, marriage between patrician and plebeian was forbidden. They said, okay, you now can marry, the patricians class can intermarry with the plebeians and vice versa, and some of them did. And also the plebeians were allowed to appoint 2 officers called tribunes. These tribunes had no lawmaking, but they could veto laws they didn't like. In other words, when they would stand in a Roman Senate during the debates, and if the Senate passed a law that the tribunes did not like, they would say veto, which means I forbid, or it's a Roman Latin word, I forbid. Now, I said the Senate made the laws. This was not always the case. In fact, Rome never did clearly define exactly who made the laws. Now, we have the same kind of situation in our own Constitution, where that our Constitution never gave our courts the power to make laws. It's not their fault. And yet, for the last 200 years, our courts, particularly recently, have been making laws right and left. Laws that they never originally had the power to do. They usurped that power. That's what I'm saying. They decided we must be able to make law also. Originally, only the Congress was to make the law. The president could either sign it or veto it. The president was not allowed to make law. But now we allow the courts to make a law, and their laws cannot be overturned. All right, again, the Romans made that mistake even worse than we did, though they didn't exactly define who was the law-making body. Anyway, as is the case in any society, certain people have amassed great wealth, and eventually these people became the large landowners, and they became the nobles, and they were able to pass their lands on to their sons. Now, this leads us up to the Punic Wars, but before I get to that, I'll pause. Call roll. Punic Wars. Okay. Now, the Punic Wars were fought between Rome and the city of Carthage. Carthage had become a great city. Carthage was located here in North Africa. I forget now whether it was located here or here, but somewhere here in North Africa. And it was probably a trading center, traded with sub-Saharan Africa, and traded a lot in the Mediterranean. It had been founded by the Phoenicians way back in past times. And they had built up an empire in North Africa. And while Rome was building itself up in Italy, Carthage was building itself in North Africa, it was inevitable that they would one day eventually meet in conflict. The first Punic War was fought over Sicily. The war was to last a long time. Now, unlike the other wars that Rome had fought, these wars would call for Roman troops to be away for years. Now, the other wars, the Roman soldier might go and stay away for a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, then come home. Well, with these wars, the Roman soldier would go and stay away for a couple of years, and then oftentimes he might come home crippled, or he might come home and find his farm had been neglected, his wife was unable to tend it, or, I mean, this has happened to many a soldier. They'd come home and find their wife had taken up with another man. I mean, this happens. Or oftentimes the soldier himself had taken up with another woman. I mean, this is part of being in a war, folks. It does happen. But the wars were really, really hard in Roman family life. Before this time, Roman men, when we would marry one time and stay with their spouse for life, and this was one of the things that made Rome strong family life. Then the wars came in and disrupted family life. But anyway, the Punic Wars were destined to last about 100 years. Anyway, the first war lasted about 20 years and resulted in a very difficult victory for Rome. Well, Rome had conquered Sicily, taken Sicily from Carthage. But then Carthage went over here into Spain, and they began to make inroads into Spain. And of course, they did not have a boundary between Spain and southern France, so that meant they made inroads into southern France. This led to the Second Punic War. Now, in the Second Punic War, Carthage sent its best general, Hannibal, one of the most famous generals in all of history. Hannibal did not invade Italy by way of the sea like Italy expected. Instead, Hannibal assembled his army here in southern France. And then, instead of going directly to Italy here, he went across the Alps mountains and hit Italy, where the Italians, where the Romans, you might say, were not expecting him. Went through Switzerland with an army of elephants. And he went into Italy, and he spent 20 years invading Italy. he invaded Italy in such a way, though, that he never would engage in a decisive battle. He would hit Italy where they were the weakest. He never engaged with one of their bigger cities. He'd hit a small city when the army was somewhere else, and then he'd disappear. Then he'd come and hit another small city. This went on for 20 years. But now one time he did engage in a big important battle. When he had enough troops, he felt like he would take on the Romans. So I'm going to try to draw this, folk. This was the Roman army, and this was Hannibal's army. All right, now keep in mind, these Romans were well disciplined trained. They would fight shoulder to shoulder, similar to hoplite fashion. Here's what Hannibal did, though. He told his center, now you people in the center, just ease backwards. Take a step backwards every time they lunge at you. All right, here's the result. After a short while, the Romans began to think they were winning. They were pushing Hannibal back. Hannibal was here. But the wings were holding fast. Hannibal's wing. The center was falling back. Well, after a while, the Romans did not realize that they were being surrounded. Then Hannibal had the wings close in, and the Romans were caught from front and behind. And keep in mind, the Roman soldiers only wore armor on their front. They had nothing on their backs. And once Hannibal was able to, I mean, you can imagine a typical Hannibal soldier would fight for a few minutes and take a step backward and make sure his buddies were doing the same thing, and each up the center take a step backward. Well, eventually the wings began to fold in on the Roman army, and eventually the Roman army found themselves surrounded front and behind on all sides, and Hannibal was able to annihilate them. Hannibal and his men went through with bushel baskets and to collect the spoil, the gold and jewels and everything that the Roman soldiers had, and all their swords and weaponry. According to the ancient accounts, 70,000 Romans had lost their lives. Now today's chroniclers do not believe the figures. Be that as it may, they said that the ancients were prone to exaggerate the figures all the time. But again, it's just another example where we don't believe everything that the ancient says. Well, Rome, though, began to make inroads into Spain, and eventually they conquered Spain and made Spain a Roman province. Then, finally, a Roman general named Scipio outmaneuvered Hannibal. Scipio said, I know what I'll do. I will go down into North Africa with my fleet, and I'll invade Carthage itself. So Scipio went into Carthage and invaded Carthage, and this forced Hannibal to leave Italy and defend his city, because otherwise, with most of Carthage's army up in Italy, Carthage was undefended. Now, according to one account of the battle, in the Battle of Carthage, Hannibal was relying heavily on a charge of elephants to smack and to weaken the Roman army. Well, the Roman general Scipio had a plan for that too. He got together with his troops and said, okay, now men, when you see an elephant charging at you, I want you to do what you've never done before. Break ranks and form a pathway and let the elephant just go right to the rear. And on its way to the rear, you can kill the elephant's driver. I can imagine, I mean, I don't know if this dude, one soldier told soldier, listen, I've been in the army 20 years and I have never broke ranks. And Scipio said, yeah, but this time I want you to break ranks. When the elephants charge at you, just form a path. Anyway, the elephants charged. The Roman army broke ranks, formed a pathway. The elephants went right straight to the Roman rear, and on the way to the rear, the Hannibal's riders were killed. The elephants then got to the rear and were harmless after that. And then the Roman armies closed ranks back up again. The elephant charge had been completely ineffective, and Hannibal was relying on it heavily. Hannibal's army engaged the Roman army. The Roman army was victorious. They made Hannibal retreat deep into the Atlas Mountains way down here in the Sahara Desert. Hannibal, though, managed to maneuver and come back. He tried to persuade Greece to rebel and Asia Minor to rebel. He could not, and eventually he died from old age, having failed to destroy Rome's territory. Well, 50 years went by. After 50 more years, Rome fought a third war against Carthage. You know, basically, the point I'm making, folks, and I'm going to elaborate this, Carthage would not quit fighting. Unlike the other cities that Rome had meant that they could placate, Carthage simply would not quit. So this time Rome went in with its army, and they completely destroyed the territory of Carthage. They annexed Carthage and made it part of Rome. But they tore down the city, scattered its inhabitants, and sold most of them into slavery to make sure, and it says for the city itself, the farmland, they put salt on the farmland where it could not grow anything again. Now eventually rains came and washed away a lot of the salt, and eventually Carthage was partially rebuilt, but never as great as it was. But basically Carthage was finally totally, its power, ability to make war was ended. And after 100 years, Carthage was destroyed and never rose again during the time Rome rose. Now, here is one reason, or there's several reasons why this war is important. Number one, Carthage had a religion that might very well have, if Carthage won, it might have set Europe back into the Stone Age and Dark Ages. Carthage's religion involved a whole lot of Wicca, witchcraft. Again, I mean, if I'm stepping on toes, I'm not going to apologize for it, but a whole lot of mind control and a lot of other features that the Roman religion did not have. That it's believed that it could have plunged Europe into a dark ages than they originally went in. I mean, that they eventually went into. Now, Europe was to go into a dark age, but nothing as dark as they might have had Carthage won. So it was not just a war of who's going to be the master. It was also a war of ideas, a war of theology, a war of religion, which, if you ask me, the side with the better religion, the most advanced religion, won. And the other side took a background. Now, there's another point I want to make about Carthage. Carthage simply would not quit fighting. All right. Now, in our own American history, the American Indians fought the white man for 300 years and fought well, but when they saw they couldn't win, they finally quit. During our Civil War, the Confederacy fought, and they fought bravely, they fought well, they won many a battle. When they saw they couldn't win, they finally laid down their arms and quit. The Germans, we took on the Germans in World War II and World War I. In both cases, when the Germans saw they couldn't win, they laid down their arms and quit. The Japanese, they were tough. They were tough. They were hard to handle. But when the Japanese saw that they didn't have the weaponry, didn't have the ability to win, they quit. But folks, you sometimes meet an enemy who, no matter how many times you beat him, no matter how much longer you're fighting, they will simply not ever quit fighting you. They won't quit. What do you do? How do you handle people like that? Well, as I say, what Rome finally did was scatter them, enslave them all the ones they caught, and scatter them to where they could never reassemble again, and destroy their capital city to where they wouldn't have a place to reassemble to. Was there another nicer way they could have handled it? I don't know of one. Fast forward to the year 2015, and the Western world is again fighting an enemy that will not stop fighting. How long has the war been going on? 1,400 years or so. And our present enemy will not quit. You all know what I'm talking about. Rome faced the same thing, but in those days they had enough fortitude about them, and they didn't have the political correctness we have. Now, folks, in World War II, we grabbed every Japanese person we could and put them in camps. We fed them, we clothed them, we housed them, but we put them in camps. Today we condemn ourselves, oh, that was naughty, we shouldn't have done it. We won the war. We won. Today we're not winning anything. We're fighting endlessly over and over and over and over, year in and year out, and not winning anything. Because we're trying to be nice and politically correct. Make sure that no civilians get killed. President Roosevelt never told the farmers, try hard not to kill civilians. We went after civilian and military alike, anyone who was in our way. We won. General Sherman came through Atlanta 140 years ago and burnt the city of Atlanta ground, burned a mile-wide path between Atlanta and Savannah. Very naughty, wasn't it? He won. Well, it's war. During World War II, we were in on the Germans' code. We learned that Germany was going to bomb a certain British city. If we'd have warned that British city, the Germans might have changed codes. What did we do? We, Winston Churchill, and we Americans together with him, decided not to warn that city, and hundreds of civilians were killed. Years later, some Britishers found out about it. They go, why didn't you warn? My daddy was killed in that raid. It's war, folk. That's the way war. If we'd have let the people know that they were going to be bombed, Germany might have changed their code. All right, if you don't like what I'm saying, I got something to tell you. I don't like what I'm saying. It's unpleasant. But I'm going to say this, we're not going to win fighting the way we're fighting. I mean, it looks like I got the class wide awake. It looked like everybody in the room was paying attention, and I'm glad of that at least. Anybody want to comment? Now, this morning's class, they all looked at me. They were all, I mean, I could tell they were listening, or it seemed to be. Nobody said a word. If you're afraid of the topic, folks, you can't be more scared than I am of the topic. I'm scared of it also. Anybody at all have anything you want to say? Yes.
Are we choosing the right battles though?
What's that?
Are we choosing the right battles? The right ones?
To me, we're not even really fighting. It's one thing to pick and choose, but we're not even fighting. Of course, I am concerned. And this war I'm talking about, we might wind up on our. We got rid of Saddam Hussein, and something worse than Saddam Hussein came on the scene. And now we're trying to get rid of Assad, and I'm just afraid that when we get rid of Assad, something worse. And also, we're going to put ourselves as Russia is for Assad, and we're against it. We might be choosing the wrong battles. Very, very good point. And folk, the war that we're fighting now, we could very, very, very easily lose. Because we don't have the will to stand up in front of it and do what has to be done. We did 2 generations ago. Hey, how would I feel if they bombed my house and my government knew about it and didn't warn me? Oh, it's war. I've thought of that, believe me, many a time over. It's called war. And we don't know how to make it anymore. All right. All right. Having said that, I mean, again, the Punic Wars lasted 100 years. They had a big disruption in Roman family life. I mean, I've already mentioned that because Roman families were never quite the same afterward. Farms were broken up. People were impoverished, permanently impoverished. Now, Rome conquered the Western world in 3 stages. First, they conquered Italy. Once they got all of Italy, then they conquered Carthage next. When they got Carthage, they had all this area here, the Western Mediterranean, these islands in the Mediterranean. Next, it was a matter of getting Greece and the eastern part of the empire. So next, they eventually conquered Greece. I believe the year was 243 BCE. And eventually, they were to conquer. Now, there was a king in Turkey, the king of Pergamum. I'm not going to worry about his name, but I do want you to remember this. Pergamum. He said, we can't defeat Rome, so when he died, instead of giving his crown to his son, he willed his crown to Rome, and Rome got the crown without even a struggle or fight. King of Pergamum willed his crown to Rome. Also, Rome was able to get Egypt when Julius Caesar married Cleopatra, and Rome got Egypt by marriage alliance without really fighting for them. That's jumping ahead of the story a little bit, but Rome wound up conquering every bit of the Mediterranean coastline, every inch of it, all the way around. And the Adriatic area here, and the Aegean area here, and even part of the Black Sea, they wound up conquering all of it all the way around. All right. Now, the war also had an effect on government. Now, folk, in time of war, our country, in times of war that we've won, our country has suspended parts of our Constitution. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln ruled like a dictator. He made laws that George III would never, George III was the king of England we rebelled against. He ruled with more authority than George III ever had. He put people in prison without a trial and without conviction. He suspended the bill of habeas corpus. I'm not saying he was wrong. Woodrow Wilson jailed a lot of people who disagreed with his war, World War I. And both Theodore Roosevelt and Winston Churchill jailed people who disagreed with that war. Now, Vietnam. We allowed dissent during the Vietnam War, and folk, we lost. We allowed freedom of speech. Here's what went on with Vietnamese finally told us, North Vietnam. He said, we went through a period of discouragement. We were fighting against the United States, and Russia was not going to help us, and we could see that China was not giving us any significant help, and nobody was standing with us, and we were discouraged. How could we ever defeat the United States? And then they saw our college students marching on campus against the war, and they said one to another, hey, if we could just hold out long enough, their college students will force them to quit fighting. It actually did happen, and North Vietnam won the war against the United States because we allowed dissent, something that you cannot do in time of war. Democracy only works, folk, when the enemy is thousands of miles away. But when the enemy is just over the hill, democracy has to take a back seat. John Paul Jones, father of the American Navy, put it this way: no matter what the principles for which we are fighting, and all of you know what principles we're fighting for freedom, but we can have none of those principles here on board my ship. On board my ship, I am the law, I'm the only law, and my decisions are final. No democracy here, or on board his ship, that is. Again, Rome, during the time of war, the Roman Senate got a whole lot of power, which they did not give up when the war was over. And also the Senate again began passing their power from their fathers to sons down through the generations. Again, a lot of soldiers return from the wars and find their farms gone. Their wives might be dead or have moved off somewhere else. Make a long story short, the land's found its way into the hands of a few very wealthy persons. And the wealthy owned all the land, and the wealthy then forced the small farmer out of business. This brings up the issue of the Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, two brothers. Last name Gracchus. Tiberius was the oldest. Now, folk, you might think politics in our country is dirty. Let me give you an example of Roman politics. Tiberius Gracchus went before the Senate. He was himself a senator. And he said, I think that we ought to take these lands that the rich have that they're not using, or that where the rich have too much, and redistribute these lands to the poor people who have fought for us and who have served our country. I think we ought to give these lands to the poor. And this has been tried many a time in history. Anyway, the Senate turned a deaf ear. But some senators became concerned and said, hey, this is popular among the masses, and the masses might eventually twist the arms of enough senators to get it through. So they rose up and they assassinated Tiberius Gracchus. Tiberius' younger brother then took up where the older brother had left off. He wanted to, like his brother, wanted to distribute land to displaced farmers. But he also went farther. He said that there's a bunch of people among us who just earned their wealth. They were born in poverty, the new wealthy they call them. This is something that the Western world has dealt with down through the ages. What do you do with these new wealthy? Do they get to... Anyway, he said these new wealthy people ought to be included as seat in government alongside the old aristocracy. And this is something the old aristocracy did not want. Hey, these new people who grew up poor, we don't want them to share the power with us. So a group of assassins got together and they killed Gaius Gracchus and killed several of Gaius Gracchus' friends this time. They didn't just stop with Gaius, so they killed his friends. I mean, this was politics in Roman times. Now, I will say it, folks, with all due respect to Tiberius and Gaius, they thought they had the solution to the problem. To me, their solution was simply wrong. not in any way that I advocate killing them for their beliefs. Not in any way at all. They should have at least been given the freedom and allowed to speak. And the people of Rome simply had enough wisdom to know, hey, this does not work. Wrote it down. But instead, the nobles were insecure and thought, hey, they might get passed, so they killed every member of the party they could find who were on the side of Tiberius and Gaius. Well, while all this was going on at home, in North Africa, the army was suffering from defeats. This was going on during the time of the Punic Wars. So, things were looking bad for Rome. I mean, they were having a little bit of problems. Into this scenario steps up a general named Marius. General Marius had been born into poverty, but he'd grown up, became wealthy, and got to the rank of general. As a soldier, he had a lot of success. He went in and he defeated the Celts living in France. What is today France? At that time they called it Gaul. He defeated the Celts. And he came home very, very popular. He took control of the army then and he won the war in North Africa. This made him even more popular. So he won in North Africa, he won against the Celts. So his influence in Rome was very, very high. Now, keep in mind, Rome was a democracy. I want to remind you, in our own history, we have elected several successful generals to be president, beginning with George Washington. George Washington, William Henry Harrison, Zachary Taylor, Ulysses Grant, Rutherford B. Hayes, James Garfield, and in my own lifetime, Dwight Davidson Eisenhower. Generally, these generals have not made good presidents. Washington was an exception. Generally not. Anyway, but we have elected generals. Well, Marius was extremely popular. Now, something else Marius did that helped him win. Rather than pick Italians only for his army, he began to recruit troops from wherever he could get them. He told the people who were not even Romans or not even Italians, hey, join my army and I'll promise you land when the war's over. He began to, it'd be like if we had a general who wanted to win, and this general would start recruiting troops from Canada, from Mexico, and maybe from the Philippines, and from China, and from Japan, and from India, and anywhere else where he could find Latin America. I mean, you name it, just simply collect any old troop from anywhere. Basically, that's what Marius did. He collected a lot of troops who were not Romans, the type of men that Rome would not have before. Now, something else he did, it was very dangerous to the Republic. He had the troops swear a loyalty to him, General Marius. Now, back in 1979, folk, I joined the Army myself, and when I joined, I laid one hand on the Bible and raised my other hand toward heaven, and I swore an oath to defend the United States. Not to President Jimmy Carter, who was president at the time. No, I did not swear to Jimmy Carter, or to the governor of the state, Governor Busby at that time. No, not to them, but to the United States government. But General Marius had his troops swear an oath of loyalty to General Marius, to himself. Very dangerous. Well, as Marius became more and more powerful, the people in Rome began to get alarmed. So another general who was from the aristocracy named Sulla was raised up. Sulla was initially sent over here in the east. He fought a few wars in the east, which he won. He came back to Rome, and he and Marius engaged in a civil war. Sulla was part of the old aristocracy. Marius, part of the born in poverty, grew up in poverty. Sulla won. Well, you might think, hey, this put a charismatic leader out of the way. Yes, it did. But now Rome had to deal with Sulla. And Sulla went in and he took over Rome itself. He became a dictator. The Republic was still alive, but Sulla made reforms that gave him, Sulla, more power and gave less power to the Senate. Essentially, he was taking over. He was making Rome more and more autocratic and less Republican. He began the process that was eventually to lead to the downfall of the Republic. All right.
There followed a 50-year period of men jostling for power and fighting civil wars. Eventually it narrowed down to 3 men. This was called the First Triumvirate. These 3 men were Crassus, Pompey, and Julius. All right, now Julius, I'll tell you up front who won. Julius wound up winning. I got his name here last, but he wound up winning. All right, Crassus was sent over to fight in the Far East, today in Turkey and Syria. Crassus met his end here. He was killed in battle. Crassus, by the way, was the richest man in the Roman Empire. Richest man in Rome, but he wound up being killed in battle. Pompey went to Spain, and he put down a rebellion. The people of Spain rebelled, but he put the rebellion down in Spain. So he became really popular. Then Julius Caesar, he went over here to Gaul, which was France, what is it they called France, but they called Gaul. And he sent back a message to Rome that consists of 3 Latin words. Now, folks, if you can pronounce it better than I can, the 3 Latin words were Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. Any one of you want to pronounce that better than I did, if you don't know Latin at all. 3 words. I came, I saw, I conquered. In Latin, they're all. The word I came is 1 word. I saw is 1 word. I conquered. 1 word. Anyway, he conquered. Now, Rome now had 2 powerful men, Pompey and Julius. The Roman Senate feared Julius Caesar, so they sent a letter to Julius Caesar, lay down your arms, abandon your army, come home, and retire to private life. Julius Caesar, if I do that, I'll never. Right, Julius Caesar was a young man, had stood before a statue of Alexander the Great, and he just broke down sobbing uncontrollably. When you were my age, you conquered the whole world, and I have conquered nothing. He was really concerned about it. He realized his dreams of conquest would never be realized if he laid down his arms. So he got together with his men and said, men, we're going to march, and we're going to take over Rome. When his men crossed the Rubicon River, and it became an expression, crossing the Rubicon, he told his men, now once the last of you are crossed, I want you to turn around and burn the bridge behind you, which leads to the expression, burning our bridge behind us. What he was telling his men, we're either going to conquer Rome or we're going to die. We're not going to go back. We're not going to retreat. So he cut off the retreat, cut off the bridge. So Cortez would do the same. When Cortez went to Mexico many generations later, Cortez told him, we're going to burn our ships, meaning we're either going to conquer Mexico or die trying, but we're not going to go back home without conquering. So he crossed the Rubicon River, went into Rome, met Pompey, and he defeated Pompey in battle. A few years later, he took over and he became dictator upon defeating Pompey in battle. Then he took on the title of dictator for life, and at this point, folks, the Roman Republic was over. This has been the fate of many a democracy, even in my own lifetime, particularly in Latin America. You'd wake up one morning and find a dictatorship and taking over democracy in Latin America. In the Far East, many a dictator took over the Far East. Some of them, though, were good dictators. Luyan took over Singapore and became a good one, and Marcos took over the Philippines, but Marcos was corrupt. But dictatorships took over right and left to these democracies. So the same thing happened in Rome. Julius Caesar was now head of the Roman Republic. Now, the failure of democracy in Greece and in Rome was to give democracy a bad name, and it was to be 1,000 or so years before Great Britain or England began another experiment democracy. And again, only England could, because England was separated from the mainland by a body of water. Folk, again, if England had been joined hard against the European continent, they could hardly have experimented democracy. You can't have democracy when the enemy is just on the other side of the hill. I mean, that's the point I'm trying to make. And Abraham Lincoln suspended our democracy when Jefferson Davis was 100 miles away, his own capital, Richmond, 100 miles to the south. Anyway, democracy in Rome was over, the Republic was over. Julius Caesar was in charge. Now, I want to elaborate on Julius Caesar. He made some reforms, and one of them, he set up the Julian calendar, which is not used today. The Julian calendar, he named the month of July after himself. July is named after Julius Caesar. The problem with the Julian calendar is it did not have enough leap year days. You may not realize how important leap years are, because without leap years, we'd eventually, after 300 or 400 years, we'd be celebrating Christmas in the heat of summer. We'd be planting our crops in November or December rather than in March and April. You know, the season would get all out of whack. The leap years keep the solstices and equinoxes. The summer solstice, when the sun gets as far north as it's going to, it starts heading south. The winter solstice, which occurs around December. We want to keep the solstice and equinoxes occurring approximately the same time. We just went through a fall solstice, a fall equinox. The fall equinox was where the sun crossed the equator on its way south on September 23rd. And then the spring equinox will occur when the sun crosses the equator on its way north, sometime around March 21st. We have to keep these days falling approximately the same day, otherwise we'll wind up celebrating Christmas when the temperature outside is 100 degrees. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas and the temperature is 100 degrees outside, yeah. But anyway, now Julius Caesar might, some people say he's suffering from epilepsy. He might have been paranoid. It was said that when Cicero spoke, that philosopher Cicero, one of the few, Cicero got in front of the Senate while Julius was sitting there and said Julius Caesar was noticeably shaken and trembling. Cicero said that private citizens should not have an army. Army should only belong to the state. And here Julius Caesar kept a private army most of his adult life. He also said that the best form of government is democracy, and anyone who tries to upset the democracy is going to wind up suffering for it. And there Julius Caesar had overthrown the Roman democracy. And I mean, he might have been paranoid, but it was said that when Cicero spoke, favoring democracy and favoring the role of the government in running the army, Julius Caesar trembled. The thing that Julius Caesar was afraid of happened to him one day. Oh yeah, I mentioned already, Julius Caesar married Cleopatra, who was the pharaoh of Egypt at the time, the only female pharaoh Egypt had, at least in this period. And the two of them had a son named Caesarion, who never got to be emperor. And anyway, Cleopatra was living in Rome with Julius Caesar, and Julius Caesar, of course, had Egypt peacefully since his wife was the queen of Egypt. But a bunch of assassins got together one day and they planned his downfall. There were about 30 assassins, and they said, now we're going to the Senate and we're going to put our daggers under our cloak. And from this we get the expression cloak and dagger. They hid their daggers under their cloaks. And they knew that Julius Caesar and all the other senators would go to the Senate chamber unarmed, because nobody would think of going to the Senate chamber with arms. And after this it changed. The next emperor had an armed bodyguard with him, even in the Senate chamber. But anyway, they carried the cloaks and they said to each other, now, they picked out about 10 of them, you get on his right, and there's the other 10 that you get on his left, and you get in front of him, you get behind him. But they were going to be engaging in conversation, with each other, anybody, but we're not going to really look at it, we're just going to know where he is. And when I, the leader, say a certain line out loud, when I say a certain line, everybody pull your daggers out and launch it to Julius Caesar. So, now this story used to be in your book, folk. It isn't anymore. According to the story, some blind soothsayer said to Julius Caesar, you're going to die on the Ides of March. Now, there's nothing significant about the Ides of March, except it's the 15th of March, and Julius Caesar died on that date. Nothing else significant about it. But sometimes in the Ides of March, remember it. And they'll point out Julius Caesar died on that date. Anyway, the Ides of March came, and Julius Caesar walked to the Senate company, passed this blind beggar, and he said, it's the Ides of March, and I'm still alive. The blind soothsayer, the Ides of March are not over with yet. And Julius Caesar walked boldly into the Senate chamber, and on a certain signal, some 30 men pulled their daggers out of their cloaks, and they all lunged at Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar looked around and noticed one of the men was Brutus, who he thought was his friend. He said, et tu, Brute, which is Latin for you too, Brutus. Then he just covered himself up and resigned himself to his fate. His friends were unarmed, and they could do nothing to stop him. He was the only one killed. Now, folk, it's known that most people who assassinate a leader wind up regretting it. The man who assassinated Julius Caesar wound up regretting it. Brutus himself was killed as a result of, he had to flee for one thing, but eventually he was caught, found, and killed for the crime of killing Julius Caesar. Anyway, this led to a civil war. Cleopatra sided with Mark Antony, believing Mark Antony would win. Now, hope this was to lead to a big movie being made 50 years ago. Have any of you ever seen a movie called Cleopatra? Starring Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. All right, a couple of you have seen it. Yeah, I saw it myself once. I had it on VHS tape, but after 20 years, the tape became so deteriorated, I had to throw it out. But anyway, nobody in my family anymore uses that VHS machine we have anymore. It hasn't been used in 3.5 years. But anyway, so much for that. But anyway, Cleopatra sided with Mark Antony. You may know Mark Antony lost. And Octavian became the next ruler. I must write these names on it. Mark Antony married Cleopatra. The winner was Octavian, whom we know as Caesar Augustus. He named the month of August after himself, by the way, and cut off a day from February because February is looking like being an unlucky month. That's why February is the shortest month. He wanted to make sure his month was as long as Julius's month. So that's why I have 2 months back to back in the summertime that are 31 days. It goes back to Caesar and Augustus, and Julius Caesar. All right, with that, folks, I'm running over time.